I remember sitting in that dorm room weeping to God, just saying, I'm sorry, Like,
Have you ever wondered what it takes to turn life's darkest moments into a beacon of hope? Imagine a journey from deep struggle getting turned to redemption, where every setback becomes a stepping stone toward helping inspire others. Who is today's guest? Let's get into the episode and find out. Welcome to Me and Poverty, a podcast about breaking barriers, building bridges, and changing lives, one story at a time. Today's guest is David Walker Jr. David is a father, a believer in Christ, and a family support specialist for Grace Haven Family Services. Raised in Jenkins, Kentucky, he grew up witnessing the weight of poverty's scarcity mindset. After earning a biology degree from Alice Lloyd College, he pursued a doctorate in physical therapy at the University of Kentucky. There, his hidden battle with alcoholism surfaced, leading to medical leave and years of turmoil. 7 years later, he hit rock bottom, landing in rehab and separated from his young son. Now, he is a testament to God's grace and redemption. He's writing a book to support others in early recovery, launching an epoxy furniture business, and serving children and families in West Virginia. His mission is to give back the hope, connection, and love that transformed his life. David, welcome to the show, my friend.
I'm excited that you even consider me to be a part of this, so I appreciate it.
Of course, buddy.
You've obviously thought about this for a while. You're doing the podcast, you've done the book. So congratulations on that.
I know you have a great testimony, and as much as you want to share it today, I'd love to get into it. What is your relationship with poverty?
And I think that's a great question, and it's really thought-provoking because it's something as an Appalachian that you almost get desensitized to. You see it a lot growing up, and I think my mind, whenever I think about poverty, it instantly goes to childhood for some reason, where me now notices it the most. However, personally, and in my immediate family, I never had to deal with that. My father went to the military. When he got out, he went to the coal mines. And my dad, for as long as I've been alive, he's worked harder than anyone I've ever encountered. And he always done his due diligence to provide for me, even after I left the house. And so I don't want to go back to Harlan County and get smacked in the face for saying that I grew up in poverty, because personally I did not. However, it was surrounding me. And I think there's different types of poverty that we need to look at. My mind obviously first goes to financial poverty, but that is probably the most materialistic, and I think that's probably where the enemy probably wants us to go to, because it's the one to get caught up in the most in conversation.
Yeah, that would be the easy route, right? He'd be happy if we only focused on the financial poverty, because then you wouldn't have the capacity to think about, man, where am I spending eternity?
100%, and that's exactly where I was going through. And there's also mindset poverty or mental poverty, and then we'll go with spiritual poverty. And I'm sure there's others, but to me, those three hit home the most. And my relationship with that is, I grew up in a neighborhood that wasn't too well off, but there was some nice homes there. There were some people that had some established jobs, and there were some people that didn't. And it was a community where we all worked together. We all lived. So many kids. I think my one holler had probably 12 kids just my age. That's not counting all the kids, but just my age. So you can see how that would interact all the families together. And then some houses I would stay at were very nice. Some houses we would have to go get wood for the night to stay warm if we planned on staying there. Some houses we couldn't stay there that night because the power wasn't on that month. And so that was my relationship with it growing up. And I was kind of spoiled, to be honest. I don't care to say that. My father and the house I grew up in, I was mostly raised by my aunt and uncle, but my father was always there, always supporting financially. And I didn't have to go with that much. But where poverty really set in and started doing with me what it wanted to was mental poverty and spiritual poverty.
That's huge, man. People don't mention that enough. And I had a great mentor of mine that he was the one that first opened me up to that philosophy, if you will. We're potentially poor in many ways. I think you said it best earlier, talking about the enemy would love for us to fixate on financial poverty, but there's people that are struggling with so much worse.
100%. And I'll tell you, the scarcity mindset, which I know you said you mentioned in you
yeah,
tell
our audience more about your version of the scarcity mindset.
So I can only talk on it from my personal perspective, and I hear some things, I consume some information about it. I'll tell you where scarcity mindset, a breakthrough in scarcity mindset has radically changed my life, and that's the mental poverty aspect. So investing in yourself. One of my mentors, and it's a mutual friend of both of ours, and he has a business where he has some mindset, motivational, inspirational classes. He's a keynote speaker. He's an author. Great guy to be around, a great mentor to have, and I'm glad to say that he's one of mine. You're investing in yourself, you're taking money and putting it in something you can't really tangibly see the benefits of.
I know all about that, my friend.
Yes. And so growing up in that scarcity mindset, you're like, I'm not paying $50 a month to surround myself with like-minded Christians that are doing great in life and that can mentor me. I'm not paying $50 a month to have 20 great mentors in my life. And that made perfect sense for a while. And now I laugh at it because I'm like, man, what was I thinking? Like, I had the world at my fingertips. I had so many avenues of growth. And all I had to do was chip in a little money for it.
Sure.
And that part, investing in myself and understanding the importance of surrounding myself with great people, even if I have to pay for it, the value of that is so head and shoulders above anything I could ever imagine. I mean, imagine sitting down weekly or bi-weekly and having these deep, detailed conversations with people about really conversations that matter, conversations that change, conversations that are thought-provoking, and you build off of that. You bounce ideas off of one another. You have a great conversation, and you walk away from it having something invaluable, something that might have taken someone 10 years to learn, might have taken someone 20 years to learn, and it's compounding interest.
That's a great way to put it. Compound interest, yeah.
And that came from a book, Atomic Habits.
One morning at the gym, I was working out listening to Atomic Habits. And I do recall now, it's something like a micro, and I actually saw you that day. So it's weird now that it's coming full circle. I probably have a note on my phone here. I'm sorry. Go ahead.
So we think about going to the gym, right? And we're like, wow, man, it's going to take an hour a day. Like, we go stage 5 in all those habits whenever we first think about them. And what I've learned, if I want to work out, guess what I have to do? I just change my shoes and my clothes. That might sound weird to you right now, but let me explain. If I can create a cue for my habit that takes less than 2 minutes, I can turn a 2-minute habit into something that's going to change my life forever. And one thing that I've associated working out with is changing clothes into my workout clothes. And once I do that, my brain is turned on, my brain is focused, and I'm out the door. Before I know it, I'm 45 minutes into a workout. And it makes it a path of least resistance, kind of. It's the same path as you would but the way I'm thinking about it is just change your clothes, and it's like autopilot from there. I just go.
Yeah, I remember the book talking about regarding the 2 minutes. It's kind of a gateway to get you to where you want to be. So that's a great example. And going back to scarcity mindset, I know I struggled with a scarcity mindset for a very long time. And I mean, I still have residual damage from that I combat every day. For me, and I even talk a little bit in my book about a scarcity mindset. Speaking of my book, if you're ready to dive deeper into my story, be be sure to click the link in the description below. Get your copy pre-ordered today from Kickstarter. Thank you, guys. Let's get back into the episode. And I talk about being able to notice when someone else is struggling with a scarcity mindset. Oftentimes that forces a person, and I'm looking inwardly here, right? It forces them to think, I need to get what's mine. Me, 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 me. And it's so counterintuitive to the way that Christ wants us to live, to what Christ has for us. But if you met somebody that just is constantly using I or me statements, you can probably pick up that they're struggling from a scarcity mindset. Would you agree with that?
I have one very important story I have to tell you now that you said that, because it goes hand in hand with it. So I came to Christ at 17, right? And that was at Seco Free Will Baptist Church in Letcher County. So I start going there, and I get involved in the youth group and the drama team, interpretive dance team. And we grow pretty rapidly. Next thing you know, pretty much half the high school is part of this youth group, and everything's going pretty well. Well, I got vested. I started reading the Word a lot. It became one of those habits that we were just talking about, prayer and reading the Word. Prayer, reading the Word became a new way of life for me. Waking up early, fitness was a big part of my life at the time. I was hitting life on all cylinders, trying to be as Christ-like as I knew how to. And things were improving, but I forgot a very valuable lesson from hit the nail on the head. I did this, I did that, this is how I did it. Let's focus everything on me, and I'm going to tell you that you need to do the same things that I did. So I got invited to teach a youth lesson, a youth sermon, whatever you want to call it. And I'm up there and I'm telling everybody what David Walker Jr. does. And I see this woman and this girl, a teenager, in the back start crying, and in my head I'm thinking, oh great, the Spirit's moving, right? It could have been more far from the truth.
Oh no.
So I get finished and I walk back there, and she calls me over to the side and she says, David, can we go to the kitchen and have a talk? I need to have a serious conversation with you. And in my head I get excited. I'm like, hey, this might be the first person I ever get to walk through the prayer, and that's where my mindset was, and it's radically changed from then. But she says, I normally come to church to learn how to be more like Christ, not to learn how to be more like David.
Gosh, just completely deflated you.
Yeah, but that was an extremely valuable lesson. I think I might have been 18 or 19 at that time whenever I gave that message. But that smack in the face was exactly what I needed. And I don't think I've ever got to tell her how important that moment was in my life. But self-centeredness is what you're talking about. And my sponsor now, going through recovery, I have a sponsor now, and he tells me, if we were always God-centered, we wouldn't sin. So, but that's impossible. We do become self-centered, and we do struggle with self-centeredness from time to time. And that self-centeredness, understanding what self-centeredness is, it's not so much just me thinking about myself or thinking about the center of the universe or whatever it might. It's being so worried and caught up about the things moving around you and how they affect you negatively. And what that done to me is gave me that scarcity view, that negative view on life. And we've had conversations about positivity and negativity before, and it sunk me down into that negative spot, because everything that happened around me, I reacted to it because I was so concerned with how it affected me and my presuppositions of how this world should go, Sure. And if it could conflict with that at all, it upset me. It made me resentful, and it led to a lot of other bad behaviors. But yeah, that self-centeredness is a huge piece to understand in life, and whenever we can become Christ-centered and die, things really start changing.
You weren't raised in financial poverty, but you suffered from other types of poverty. We'll get to that in just a moment. But you talked about going to Alice Louis College, which our audience probably knows by now. I'm a fan. Education changed my life. It opened doors for me. I'm a first-generation high school graduate. Very proud of that for my family. What role did education play for you, David?
It's playing a role right now, Joe. It's changed my life in ways I didn't expect. Because when you go into college, you're young, and I'm sorry if you're a young audience, but if you're anything like me, you wasn't the wisest young person. I definitely wasn't.
Sure.
I thought I was, but I was not. And
yeah, high school Joe thought very highly of himself.
Same
unfortunately.
Here. Same here. Same page. So I go into college thinking occupation. I'm doing all this for occupation. I never thought I was going to college for conversation. I never thought I was going to college for relation. And college to me, because I don't actively use my biology degree. I did pre-med. I'm not in med school. I'm not a doctor. I did pre-med because I had an idea that I might want to work in healthcare. And if I did pre-med, then that covered everything, right? I could go into med school if I changed my mind. I could be a pharmacist, dentistry, physical therapy, nursing, anything I wanted to. I could have went in there. It was kind of like an umbrella degree. I thought that was a pretty good idea. The catch with that umbrella degree is the incentive behind it is going to graduate school. And if you don't, there's not a ton of things there's still things you can do with it, don't get me wrong. But occupation wise, there might not be a ton of things you can do with it. However, there is. And the way that education has helped me is simply through conversation and relationships, building other people up, being able to just have a conversation that goes through different avenues of life, different perspectives. Going to college also gave me a lot of perspectives. There was a lot of culture changes at Alice Lloyd. There was a lot of resistance in my beliefs, my core beliefs, and that challenged me to grow.
I was a fish out of water going to college for all the obvious reasons that you can think of with poverty, but even from a spiritual one, I was sort of kind of bigoted, thinking, man, only the Free Will Baptists are going to heaven. Like, that's going to college, man. We ended up having Bible studies in my dorm room. I mean, it was a very small dorm room, and the amount of people from different backgrounds, walks of life, doctrines, if you will, man, I found out pretty quick that it ain't only the free wills going to heaven.
Yeah, and it knocked me off an imaginary high horse of mine, and I'm sure if you came into it with that mindset, the same thing probably happened to you.
Absolutely, yeah.
And I remember reading John chapter 8 and being told one time, you without sin, cast the first stone. And I puffed up with pride and anger when I was told that.
Sure.
And I went back to my room and whimpered like a little pup, and I opened my Bible and I opened it to John chapter 8. I remember sitting in that dorm room weeping to God, just saying, I'm sorry, like I've not been fostering the image of your son. I've not been
Sure.
loving people the way you need to do through your word, all 66 books of it. And it was an eye-opening moment for sure. And I say now, I heard something this past week, and it was just focused on, it was Paul Washer. If you know Paul Washer, if you ever watched him, he was in a prison, and it's just now coming out on Heart Cry Ministries, but he's in a prison, and he opens up with a story of this man who used to minister to lepers back in the day. He would go to this group of lepers, and he would start out his sermon with lepers or brothers that are struggling with leprosy, something to that extent. He addressed them as being slightly different than him. Well, time goes on, and he starts noticing some sores on his body that aren't healing. And And he does what he can. He's kind of in denial. He goes through a couple weeks, and then he realizes for sure he has leprosy. And so that next sermon, after he made that realization, he goes up to the pulpit and he says, "Fellow lepers."
Oh, man.
And I think sometimes as Christians, especially, two things. One, I used to have a best version of myself in my head, and I obtained that by age like 18. Sure. And then pride and destruction followed. I quit growing. I thought I was good. I thought I had arrived, and then it was a steady decline after that. Two, when I am growing and it appears to me that everything is going good, I have to be most cautious during those times, because my feelings aren't facts. I might feel like everything's going good, but if I'm not taking a thorough inventory and I'm not bouncing these ideas off of people, I'm not talking about being vulnerable about my life to my inner circle. Now, I'm not saying go out on Facebook Live and cast out all your cares across that, but you need an inner circle. You need a table that you sit down at, whether it could be over a phone, but you need a table that you sit down at some way, shape, or form with somebody that you can open up with and be vulnerable. And yes, I always start with prayer on that, but it's also good to find a brother in Christ, a mentor, to really hold yourself accountable for all those things. And when I don't, and things are going good, that's when I get furthest away from Christ, honestly, because I take the spotlight off of Him, I take the glory off of Him, and my flesh loves to shift it back to myself. And it's never me. It never was me. It never has been me, and it never will be me. It's always Him. It's
easy to slip back into that scarcity mindset, right? And we have to combat it, man. I'm there. I still struggle with it, and pride and all of that as well. But what type of poverty, not financial, what type of poverty would you say you've struggled with, David?
Definitely mental poverty and spiritual. So I talked a little bit about mental poverty already, but spiritual poverty, never feeling like, which this is a true statement, feeling like I'm not good enough to be saved. Do we deserve Christ's sacrifice? Do we deserve such a great love? The answer is no. Like, we don't.
Sure.
But we still are worthy in His eyes. In His eyes, if we weren't worthy, it wouldn't have happened. God had a plan for us for reconciliation, and He thought we were valuable enough to receive in His Son. And being a father has helped me break free of some of that spiritual poverty, because I haven't understood love to that capacity.
Yeah.
When I look at Holden and I'm spending time with him, and God just subtle, hey, think about that for a second. You're absolutely consumed with love and simply looking at somebody. And someone is, especially, he runs up to me, I call him on the phone, and he's happy to see me. He's happy to talk to me. He's happy to get in the car with me, or whatever it might be. Think that God feels that way whenever I open up and really focus prayer to Him. And I'm just happy to be praying, and I'm grateful for everything that He's given me, even the time to stop and think about prayer, to think about that relationship, think about that conversation. It is like someone else is in the room. Whenever I can quiet everything and focus, it's like I am speaking to my Father. And it's like He really is there. And that to me is key in that spiritual poverty, and breaking free from that spiritual poverty. Because I know there's nothing I'm not going to do for that boy now. I know that he can smack me in the face. And he has.
My 3-year-old does.
And he has. He can spit in my face, which he has.
Yeah.
And I'll correct him after that. I'll have a conversation with him after that and tell him, hey, don't do this. X, Y, and Z, here's why.
Body slammer.
Yeah. So, just knowing that, man, and knowing that my Heavenly Father looks at me in a similar manner, it just shatters so much of that self-doubt that scarcity towards God just keeps me safe from that performance-based relationship.
That's right.
Like I'm just trying to please God. Like I trust God. I trust God, and I'm not so worried about pleasing God by something that I can do in and of my own power. I just trust Him and lean not to my own understanding, but I lean to Him.
I'd like to talk a little bit about, as much as you're comfortable with, sort of your journey with recovery and the role that alcoholism played in your life. So, what advice would you maybe have with someone, they've got a loved one that's struggling? What advice would you give that person that's trying to help, that's trying to love them properly? What would you say to them?
My textbook for recovery says to wait until they've had a rock bottom experience. If they're doing good and they're convinced that they can use successfully, let's say they're using and they just fibbed on that certain test that everyone takes for employment, and they get this job and they're having new income come in and they're paying their bills finally, it's going to be hard to convince them that they need help during that season, right? But it might not be so hard to convince them that they need help if you show up at their house and they're laid on their floor in a pile of their own bodily fluids. That might be a little bit of an eye-opener. So you look for an opportunity, one. Two, I would suggest probably finding somebody that's been through that and has some time and has some experience in overcoming that. And you can find that in the church. You can find that in some of the anonymous groups that exist. You can find that in Celebrate Recovery. You're going to find people that have been through that. And don't feel ashamed that you might have to go outside and ask for help yourself to help them. It might require some special help to convince that person, because one thing that they're going to see is, wow, this is something so concerning to them. They went and found somebody to come help me.
Sure.
And the way my dad got to me, just to share my own personal, was my dad never, for one, he never really knew how bad my alcoholism was, but he also never really harped at me for my drinking. Like, he knew that I drank, but he never really harped at me. And even when there was some consequences coming about it, he might say a little something, but he never sat there and lectured me. But when I was 32 years old and he did for the first time, I listened. Whenever he came to me urging me that I needed help, he didn't care what I did as long as I went and got help, I listened then. But now that's coming from a unique perspective of he never nagged at me for 32 years or 16 years, and then when he finally did, I listened. But that's where I would start. Look for opportunity and bring in reinforcement if needed.
That's great advice. Much appreciated. Addiction is no respect of person. I appreciate you sharing your story some, and today it sounds like you're doing some great work. You're a family support specialist. Tell us a little bit about that.
So, here in Louisa, Inez, in this area, we know a lot about peer support specialists, and we know that the role that they have in recovery. Well, family support specialist is what it sounds like. You're supporting families. I'm an independent contractor through Grace Haven, but also through the state of West Virginia, right? So I go to families that need reconciliation. I go to families and provide services that I needed a year and a half ago. And that's what I look for. So I will look, now you can do this job multiple different ways, but what I look for is people with the same struggles of addiction and alcoholism that I went through, that are separated from son or daughter, and I take those cases and I intervene and I get to help out the parent and the child. I will take the child to the parent and have visits. I supervise their visits. And in doing so, there's a lot of great conversations to have. Now, there's some red tape around any job. I can't just go out and start preaching the gospel to them, right? Like, just straight up. But there's nothing in there, in the red tape, that I've ever seen that says I can't share my own personal story. I can't talk about what I've been through. I don't tell them what to do. I don't try to give them advice in the least.
Or what to believe.
No, nothing like that. They believe and think and do as they please. But when they ask, when they find out that, this guy went through the same thing a year and a half ago. They ask questions, and I give them what happened to me, and they're pretty prone to listen to that, and they take notice of it. And that's what I do. I try to reconcile families the best of my ability.
I could definitely have benefited when I was a youth. My grandfather and I, and it's detailed in my book, the relationship that we had. It was strained our whole life. I ended up being a homeless youth, and we eventually reconciled later, thankfully, before he passed. I think we could have definitely benefited from your services, my friend. So definitely keep up the good work there. It sounds like you're getting to make a big difference. What would you say is the biggest spiritual stronghold that keeps people trapped in poverty?
Well, I'm going to go with a little bit of perspective change, because I think poverty ends with perspective. There's something that I see in the church and everywhere. We give the enemy so much power and so much credit for our intrusive thoughts, for our flesh, for our own sinful desires. Stronghold is, and I'm not saying take focus off the enemy, because he is very cunning, he is very deceitful.
Yeah.
But so are we. We do that to ourselves all the time. And to really focus in on not being so self-centered, on being humble. And being humble isn't thinking less of myself, it's thinking about myself less. And being humble and being loving is really thinking about, when you ask me to do this, my old mindset would have said, oh, I get to be on a podcast. Hey, go David. But that's not where I go today. Where my mind went when you asked me to do this, I thought of you. I thought of Joe is starting this podcast. He's written a book. He's doing the thing that so many people don't dream to do. They think about it. They want to do it, but they don't take the action required, and they're not trusting God enough to bless their faith. Because what you're doing right now is you're stepping out in faith, Joe. I don't know if you noticed that or not. I think you probably do, but you're stepping out in faith and you're doing something hard that requires you to lean on God. You probably grew closer to God through this experience, because you've probably made some financial decisions and some hard choices that your mind told you probably was a dumb idea.
Sure. One of my spiritual mentors, he taught me this years ago, that we are spiritual beings dragging around this flesh. It's not the other way around. So, absolutely, you think for a second that, like, my flesh, my brain said, Joe, nobody's going to watch this. God's just, it's a calling for me. And thanks be to God, I was able to punch that thought in the face. It's funny, being generous, being vulnerable, all of those things, they're muscles. And the more you stretch them, the more likely they are to grow. So I'm very grateful that I've developed that understanding that I'm saved, I'm changed, I have Jesus in me, and I'm no longer thinking of self, right? This ain't about me. So absolutely, buddy. It's huge.
I mean, that's pretty much it, man. It is thinking about selfless. And what can you mentioned? You hit the nail on the head again. You mentioned all these tools of faith and really stretching your muscles to use those. A friend of mine, we were talking about tithing, and do you want to? It's real easy to tithe your net, what you bring home. It's real easy to tithe what you bring home. But are we willing to tithe our gross income, or do we want a God that blesses with grossly or netly? And that was kind of his perspective.
That's challenging,
and that smacked me right in the face, because I was like, I give to Caesar what is Caesar, but am I giving to God what is God's? Am I giving Him the first fruits of my labor, paycheck after paycheck? And that really convicted me, man. And I've always scarcity mindset, poverty mindset. Anybody starts talking about tithing, I instantly cut them off. I'm like, they're televangelists. They want all my money. That's all they're thinking about. But tithing, man, now it's a tool for the kingdom. And
Sure.
if you know anything about kingdom math, it doesn't make any sense. I like to think of myself as a math guy, as a science guy. That's at least what I've done halfway decent in my life. So I like that logical, 2 plus 2 is 4 type thinking, that black and white type thinking that, I want reproducible results. But the thing about the kingdom is you don't get that. You have no idea how God does his math. And you're sitting there with a product or a blessing that you have no idea how that happened. I'll tell you, when I went through internship, I do the Dave Ramsey thing. I write down all my income, all my expenses. I try to follow the baby steps, all that. Well, when I was an intern, first time making money in 6 months because I went through inpatient treatment, I wrote down my expenses. I had $16 per month left over. That means I had $16 to spend on eating out, coffee, whatever, per month. I had to spread $16 out over 30 days. And somehow, I was able to do a lot more than I ever thought I possibly could. I had people help me that I did not expect. I had blessings coming in left and right. It was like every single 2-week period there was not only financial help, but spiritual help, mental help, support coming in from all different avenues of life. And I'm just so thankful that experience was documented. I have all that written down. I have that memory really stored in there. And I pray to God I never forget it, because that was proof to me that God's not a God of poverty. And if we're just thinking about the financial part, yeah, there's gonna be seasons in our life where we might not have what we think we need, but we do. There's been times in my life where I've thought I've not had enough money. There's a mutual friend of mine I heard say in the cafe the other day. She writes down her expenses, and she knows that her expenses exceed her income by $20 every single month. But guess what? She's been paying bills without hesitation, without interruption for 3 years. How does that happen,
Wow.
Joe?
Yeah.
And I know I'm focused on the financial part because that's the examples I've heard and the examples that come to mind. But that principle applies for the mental poverty. It applies for the spiritual poverty. God is a provider. He is our Father. And He's big enough to do anything.
The journey that he's had me on it doesn't make any sense, man. In the most beautiful way possible. I'm so grateful for what he's brought me from, where he's taking me, and the lessons I've learned along the way. It's great. Let's say someone is struggling from poverty one way or another. They see this. What's the number one thing you say to them to help them escape their poverty, whatever kind it may be?
Man, I've spent all my life looking for some big profound message to say in situations like this. Sure. In my head, some way, shape, or form, I have built up this idea that David Walker Jr. can come up with something the masses have never heard before, and I'm going to get credit. It's that self-centeredness, right? It goes back to that. But every ounce of power, blessing, fruit, whatever you want to put in there, every ounce of goodness comes from Christ. And if you're struggling with something today, whether it be poverty, addiction, when we are able to see our sin and see our faults and see the wickedness and the wrongs in our ways, and we really see that's really revealed to us through the Spirit, we should never want to see that again, and we should turn and we should repent and we should pick up that cross and follow Christ. And if you stare at the cross long enough, you stop staring at yourself and you are able to extend your arms to the side and bring people with you. And you lend a hand out and you start thinking about others. You start thinking about encouraging others. I think there's a point sometime in our life, like we're always looking for that encouragement. We're always looking for that mentor. We're looking for some type of help. And I think at some point that burden, or not burden, that responsibility and that blessing really falls into our own laps. And today I kind of feel like I'm somewhat there. I feel like God's done far above for me, and all I try to do is share what's been so freely given to me.
That's right, buddy.
But I would say just keep staring at the cross. It's not about me. It's not about you. It's not about us thinking about the guy over here that's just doing great at life.
Sure.
Or financially successful, or successful in business. It's not about all that, man. It goes back to, 2,000 years ago, God said, here's my son, here's reconciliation, here's the path back to me. I don't even have the words to really describe it, other than it's led me to love others. It's led me to hate that flesh, and you're going to hate that sin, and you're going to turn to Him in all your ways, acknowledge Him in all your ways. And if we're doing that, I think you can stay on the straight and narrow.
Our audience, they're only getting to hear a small part of your testimony, right, today. We could talk forever, but I appreciate you taking the veil down, allowing us in just for a little bit today. And I talk heavily about how sharing stories is the difference maker. And I'm often reminded, we as human beings, we crave community. So you being brave enough to let the veil down I hope and pray it inspires someone else that may be struggling. And keep doing what you're doing, man. Keep helping reconcile families. Keep being a witness. I'm hopeful and excited to see what God has in store for you. And I know you've learned a lot of valuable lessons. I'm super proud of you, buddy, and wish you the best.
And I just want to say thank you for the opportunity to share. I think that, we don't share stories in this type of way all the time.
Sure.
Today I do follow Christ, but it hasn't always been that way. You said let down the veil. Well, to show you where it was, I was completely and utterly obsessed with alcohol. My thought life was consumed by how I was going to get it, how much I was going to get, and when was I going to get more. So to see that, to see myself go from that mindset to thinking about how I can encourage others, and that's my, what do you want the audience to hear today? I want them to be encouraged. I want them to know, and I want you to be encouraged too. I hope I've already done that, but you're doing things that are forcing you to grow. Yeah. You're not sure how this podcast is going to turn out. You have no idea. You have no idea how the book's going to turn out, but you're stepping out in faith. You're speaking life on it, and you're leaning to God and leaning to your community to see how that goes. And I pray that you wake up one morning and you check your phone or you check something and your jaw hits the floor and you can do nothing more than weep to God in appreciation.
Sure.
And I hope and pray that moment happens. I hope you send me a text when it does. And I
will, buddy.
And I hope everyone just perseveres in their life till they can have that moment. To persevere to where they get surprised at how big God actually is. That they learn something new about His character, and they're completely floored at what faith can do.
Thank you so much for spending some time with me today, buddy. Thank you for being vulnerable. I know someone's going to benefit from this. Speaking of that, if you did find this meaningful today, please be sure to like this video, subscribe, and turn on your notifications. It's not about me, guys. It's not about David, even. It's about Jesus working through us. And hopefully this is going to inspire someone today. And remember, keep telling stories. See you in the next episode.